All right.
Perfect. So if you'd like to, so if everybody's coming, go ahead and answer the questions to the poll, choose your top 3 topics, and then we're going to have Shaun give a little bit of a background while we're getting set up and while everybody's coming into the room. And then, yeah, we'll get started though in earnest here in just a couple minutes. All right.
Yeah, hey. So I'll probably repeat a little bit of this when everybody's ready to go, but I'm Shaun Spalding. I'm Assistant Director of New Media Rights. We're a local San Diego nonprofit, and we are lawyers who work with a lot of the startup community, as well as creatives like filmmakers, game developers, and we've been working with the rec since it started. And in addition to coming in and giving sort of more general chats about legal issues that you all might be facing as you continue with your projects, we also give slightly, I mean, not slightly, but much more in-depth, free one-on-one consultations. So they're usually about an hour to an hour and a half directly to teams, so we can actually talk about some of the specifics of your project. Because one thing that we found is that it's very easy to put someone sort of going in the right direction early on, but it's very difficult to fix a problem once one arises. And so much easier for someone to know what not to do, just avoid doing that, than to have done that thing that they shouldn't do, and then we are contacted to fix it. So choose wisely on that choose your own adventure list, because I will talk about the topics in the order that they were voted on, and usually I only have time to talk about maybe 2.5 of them before time's up.
Yep, and it looks like we have most of the people who've come have made their choice, but we do have some people who've not yet chosen. So if you have not yet chosen, please do click on that poll and give us your top 3 choices of what you'd like Shaun to cover today. He will be trying to cover all 3 topics. We'll see how far we get, and it looks like people are steadily coming on over. We have about 40 people in the room. So we are, just to let everybody know, we are recording this workshop. We record all of the workshops that we provide here at the Rec. This is the first workshop of the spring 2021 semester, and we welcome you all here. We're excited to have you, and we're excited to have Shaun Spalding from New Media Rights again. Before we actually go ahead and get started, if you wouldn't mind indulging me, Shaun, I'd like to just give a quick shout out to some of the partners who've helped us out at the Rec. There's a long list, so I'll try to make it quick, and we're just so grateful. We want to make sure to give a shout out to all of them, and thank you all for being here. We realize that we have people coming from San Diego State, from Miramar, from the Rec Innovation Lab, and then from different classes, and you're all very welcome. So to our partners, though, we would like to give a shout out and say thank you to 21IQ Labs, Score San Diego, We Are Kingdom, to New Media Rights, obviously, to San Diego Angel Conference, Harness, Connect All at the Jacobs Center, San Diego Tech Hub, Origin 63 and Greg Anderson, Productified and Alex Trainer, the Brink SBDC, Fresh Brewed Tech, Startup San Diego, Ambrosio 15, OmniSync, Zip Launchpad at SDSU, as well as the Lavin Center at SDSU, and Optima Office and Jennifer Barnes. Thank you to all of our partners who make it possible for us to do these workshops, and welcome to everyone who's here. I see that most of you have completed the poll. Some of you have not. Please do answer what 3 topics you would like Shaun to cover today. And looks like we have a lot of people just kind of coming in at the last moment here. But if you're just getting here, do answer those poll questions. And Shaun, did you want to maybe quickly run through that the introduction before and then we'll get started?
I'll just kind of keep going. One thing you should know beforehand, our website's newmediarights.org. And if you want to know more about what we do and follow us, you can sign up for our newsletter. I promise we won't spam you. We send out something maybe like 3 times a year.
And if anyone's in any of my classes, I saw that book there on your your website.
Yeah, we have a book.
Yeah, I love that book. Yes. So I'm sure a lot of students have seen this book. We use this. It's an optional purchase in all of the entrepreneurship classes. Really good book for the basics of starting a business. Really
yeah, it's $10. It has like illustrations in it. So buy it for the pictures, but keep it for the information.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
Okay, so just to let you know, we're a nonprofit. We work with creators, entrepreneurs, and internet users. We do a lot of intellectual property law, privacy law, and media law. We don't have very much time, especially since we started a little bit late. And so as you're choosing what it is that you want to talk about for the rest of this, I want to let you know that we've opened up one-on-one consultation. So those kind of like hour to hour and a half long discussions you can have directly with us in private. And so they're free. And so they're going to be on February 18th. So if you go to this link, bit.ly/NMR 2021, you can sign up. They're first come, first serve. There's currently only 3 open. And so, so yeah, I think that it would be useful. And some people, you can ask people who have done it in the past what they thought about it, and they can tell you better than I can whether or not it was useful to them. I do ask, if you do sign up, please make sure that you actually want to do it and that you're going to show up, because again, it's like we only have a limited amount of resources, and we're trying to spend an hour to an hour and a half with you. And so if you don't show up, then it takes away from other people who could have done it. And also it's first come, first serve. So by that time we can't reschedule.
And I would say this too, if that ever happens with anyone at the rec, you if you make an appointment with a mentor or with one of our providers and you don't show up, that's not acceptable. Obviously, you do that twice and you won't come back to the rec.
Yeah, and look at all these smiling people here. Do you want to disappoint them by not showing up?
No, we would never.
No,
never. No. So, Shaun, would you like us to go ahead and
yeah, tell me what the poll answers are, so we can begin in earnest.
I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll unless anybody else wants to quickly put in an answer.
Chance.
All right. So, all right, and there is the poll. I'm going to share the results with everyone.
All right, business formation, win. Contracts with partners and co-founders, win. And a photo finish, but contractors with developers and designers is number 3 with 7%. So don't ever say that your vote doesn't count. All right. So what we're going to talk about first is business formation. Okay, so you can Google all sorts of stuff about LLCs and corporations. And so I'll spare you from the types of things that you can learn simply by Googling. I'll summarize them very quickly. So there's lots of different types of entities in California. Some of them are going to be LLCs, these have less formalities. Some of them are going to be corporations, so these have more formalities. Anytime you enter into a business in California, regardless of whether or not you filled out any paperwork, you are most likely a sole proprietor. If you work with more than one person who can potentially also make business decisions, then you might be a general partner. And so why do people enter into these things? Again, this is all stuff that you can Google, and I'm going to talk about other more important stuff. But people enter into these things because they want to limit their personal legal liability. So for example, if you end up getting sued, then they can only sue you for the amount that your company makes, not necessarily sue you for everything you own, like your car, or if you own property or something like that. LLCs and corporations often have tax advantages. So you see people writing off certain expenses on behalf of their business, like a car or the home office, things like that. So there's often things that you can do in terms of taking advantage of taxes when you have an entity. It shows a mark of professionalism, right? No one's truly a CEO until you actually form a corporation, right? And so, and also this type of legitimacy is necessary to secure outside investors who aren't friends and family. So for example, it's very, very hard to get anyone to invest into you as a person, but it's much more easy to get someone to invest in your LLC or corporation, mostly because of the legal protections surrounding that, right? An LLC has to have its own independent bank account. So if someone puts an investment in there, they can expect it to stay there rather than paying your own bills. Then why do people decide not to formalize their entity? So why do people stay sole proprietors or general partnerships? And so that's because both cost money to form and maintain. So LLCs and corporations cost money to start, whereas being a sole proprietor or being a general partnership costs nothing, right? You probably are a sole proprietorship right now if you didn't already know. And that's something that you can Google to figure out what that means. No formalities and few administrative requirements. So if you're a corporation, they require you to fill out paperwork and do voting and have a board and all sorts of other things that aren't required by a general partnership. And so if one is at the idea stage, right, you probably don't have time, energy, or the inclination to do all of these formalities, and maybe you're not ready to form an entity yet. All right, so again, Google all that information. The more important thing here is I want to tell you about the questions that I get from people after they've Googled all of this stuff. So once they come to me and they're like, hey, I don't understand this. And so the biggest question is, how do I figure out if it's worth it to formalize my entity? And so by the time you end up paying your legal fees to the state, and maybe with a lawyer, it's going to cost $2,000 to $3,000 to start one of these formal entities. Even if you do it yourself via LegalZoom, it's still going to be about $1,000 between fees and taxes, and then you're going to have to pay that $1,000 or so every year after that to maintain it. And so when is it worth it to spend that type of money? And so some people make the mistake of deciding that they're going to do this too early, and so they start the LLC, and then for whatever reason their idea doesn't pan out, or it takes much longer for them to do, and so they don't end up spending the money or taking the time to follow any of the rules. And so once you don't follow the rules, you don't get protection anyway. And so some of these people ended up spending lots of money and time actually creating an LLC or a corporation, and then didn't even get any of the benefits because they didn't have the time or energy or money to do that. All right, so when do you do it? All right, I think that it is easiest to explain when to do it, not by giving you a specific answer, because everyone's business is different and everyone's risk tolerance is different, but instead giving you kind of this diagram to allow you to figure it out. And so if the benefits that come from an LLC is protecting your valuable possessions from, for example, lawsuits, right? You start with the question, how valuable are your personal assets, right? Because if you have very valuable things that you own, the more likely it is that it's worth protecting those things via an LLC or a corporation. And so if you are broke, then maybe you don't have that many valuable things, right? The most valuable thing you own is like your cell phone or something like that. But then contrast that with someone who might own a car or even a house, right? If you want to protect a $400,000 house, it might be worth spending $800 to do that, right? All right, compare that, right, with the probability that things could go wrong. And so everybody's business is different. Everyone's business has a certain level of risks that even as a non-lawyer you understand. So for example, if you have a business that, I don't know, sells online courses or something like that, there aren't that many ways that someone could get mad at you or get hurt by these things. Maybe you gave them wrong information or something like that, or maybe the download that you sent them didn't actually work, so now they want their money back. But if you start, for example, a business that sells people food, the amount of things that you could get in trouble for are endless. What if the food went bad and the person got sick, or the person got really sick, right? You can see how someone's medical bills could start racking up. So every single person here who has a business knows, or at least can do extra research to determine how likely is it that something could go wrong. And then you realize, well, what do LLCs and corporations and the like do? They make sure that if something does go wrong, someone can't attack your valuable assets. And so that's something to really think about. And don't just think about it in sort of you need to really do research, right? You need to figure out, of the kinds of people who have done a business like mine before, who got in the most trouble and why. I mean, this is a useful exercise, not just to figure out whether or not you need to form an entity, but it's also generally, if you're in business, you want to limit the amount of ways that your business can go badly for you. And so learning about all the ways that people in the past have messed up is a really great thing to avoid messing up in those same ways in the future. All right. Finally, your willingness to take on upfront costs versus the value that you get. And so, again, everyone's in a different position. Some people might be very far along in their project, and they realize that they might even be speaking to investors really soon. Like, oh, I have an uncle who might be an angel investor, friends and family investor, who will give me $50,000. And so if that's the case, then the value you get by making sure that you're a formalized entity before you have that conversation is really strong, because no one's necessarily going to want to invest in you if their money gets transferred directly to your bank account rather than the bank account of a formal legal entity. What if, for example, you have a major contract coming up? And so a handful of people have been lucky enough to work with the city of San Diego in their airport program. And so again, the San Diego airport has a program where they work with entrepreneurs, but I imagine they probably would be much more reluctant to work with an entrepreneur who wasn't a formally organized business, just because they have insurance requirements and things like that. So if you think that you're going to work on some sort of big contract or partnership with some large institution, these people are going to be much more likely to work with you if all this stuff is settled ahead of time. Also think about how much money do you have to spend and what are you going to spend it on? Because maybe I think that a lot of people who, if you work with a private attorney and you're like, oh, should I form my business? They're like, of course you should. And I mean, partially because I think it's useful to do it, but also partially because lawyers get paid to form businesses, so they're not going to talk you out of it, right? And so the idea is that you should really think about the value you get for the money put in, because some people sort of create this thing for $3,000 and they run out of money to even market or finalize the product that they make. And if there's no product, there's no money. And if there's no money, there's no business. And if there's no actual business transaction going on, then you don't actually really need a formalized entity yet. And so, but all these three things, you just start comparing and contrasting your specific situation, and you can start to tell that, well, maybe I don't need one now, but if X happens, I think I probably need it. And so you're always sort of weighing these things. And maybe today you don't own a car, but next week you do. And then the things kind of weigh differently. All right, so next question. So this is figuring out if it's worth it to form a business. And now let's talk about at what point in the process do these things kind of collide with one another? All right, so let's look at a timeline of how business might be formed, right? You start out with a product idea, right? I want to make a company that sells winter socks, but they, instead of having like little Christmas trees on it, their winter theme, they're actually summer themed. So they're Christmas socks, but they have palm trees. And because people love to think that it's going to be summer soon. This is my hypothesis as to why people will want to buy summer themed socks in the winter. Well, I have this product idea. Should I register my LLC yet? Well, 9 out of 10 product ideas are stupid. And of the product ideas that move forward, 9 out of 10 of those fail. And so maybe what we should do is we don't necessarily have any risk yet. There's very few things that can go wrong if I start talking to other people to determine the viability of the product, right? And so I probably don't necessarily need an LLC yet, because what could happen if I just tell 50 people about this product and ask them what they think, or start doing surveys or market research to determine if people would actually wear them? And then I actually do it, right? I determine whether or not people will wear them, and I realize that no one wants summer themed wool socks, and so the business is done, right? I didn't actually spend the money to start an LLC that I didn't need because the business idea was stupid. All right, but let's say you got past that hurdle, right? Because all of your ideas are now sort of being market tested, or they're going to be market tested, and I think that you believe in them. And so let's start thinking about what happens when you bring on internal partners. And so this might be, you might be a founder who knows a lot about, I don't know, selling the certain type of product that you're about to sell. But you bring on someone else who might be the type of person who knows how to build a website or build an app, or the person who is planning on being the head of doing sales for the product. And so you have a handful of people who are now kind of on your founding team. Well, do you need a LLC or a corporation yet? Well, let's look at this chart, right? Well, the more people who are involved, the more valuable your collective assets are, right? And if someone sues one of you, since you are a general partnership, they can sue any one of you for the business, right? If all of your valuables are starting to collect and get expensive, maybe it's time to start an LLC. At the point where you're actually starting to do things, right? Well, this person is calling people up and trying to get sales, and this person is, things can start to go wrong. I mean, imagine for a second, right? All the things that can go wrong internally. Let's say someone gets upset and they think, oh, well, actually the business was more my idea than yours, so I should own more of the business. We're going to talk about this more when we talk about contracts with internal partners, but things can go wrong internally way before they can go wrong externally. And as a result, right, if someone is concerned about how much of the business they own, it's probably a good idea to figure out what kind of business you even have. And forming an LLC and a corporation is a very good way to do that, because this is why we have them, because they allow people to own parts of the businesses as equity, right? So this is what one means when they're saying, oh, I have shares in the business. That's a corporation, they own a part of it. And so if people are, as soon as you bring on internal partners, people are going to start getting concerned with who owns what, and then an LLC could be helpful to figure that out if you haven't actually figured that out via some sort of partnership contract beforehand. Okay, we'll bring on external partners. So you cleared this hurdle and everybody is very happy with each other and no one is complaining about anything. And so you now are starting to work with someone else or the airport or someone, a distributor. Again, you see that the bigger your distributor is or the less risk tolerant they are, the more likely it is that they'll want you to be a formalized entity before they enter into the agreement with you. And so as this goes along, right, you see that the value you're getting goes up. And if you have the potential to sign a $50,000 contract with a large partner, but you know that they'll have cold feet if you're not a formalized entity, it then probably seems like it's worth spending the $2,000 to start your LLC or corporation. And so you can see, based on the story that I'm telling, that all these things are constantly changing, and you should just continue to evaluate how they change in order to figure that out. All right, I could keep talking about this, but I'm going to move on. Let me talk about this beforehand. All right, so a lot of people end this by asking, well, I don't necessarily think that I'm going to register this now, but can I protect myself even if I wait? And the answer is yes. And so we're going to talk about how to do that via contracts in a few minutes. But I want to reiterate one thing that I said earlier. The best legal way of making sure, the best way of making sure you don't get any legal disputes is to never actually get anyone mad at you. Right? It seems like a kind of weird counterintuitive thing, but people don't sue each other. People don't sue other people that they like and that they're happy with, right? Even if they do something legally wrong. But people find any way to sue someone who they don't like or they're mad at, even if that person did nothing wrong. And so how do you use this information? You use it by realizing that if an LLC is mostly about protecting you from legal liability, the best thing you can do to protect yourself from legal liability is to avoid making enemies and avoid doing things that, for example, are unsafe, or doing things that the people that you sell to don't like, etc. Or treating the people you work with internally well so they don't get mad at you and don't create problems. And so the one big takeaway, other than talking about LLCs, is you should go back and really think about very hard and do a lot of research on who has done the thing that I am doing right now and what bad things happen to them. Right? Going back to me saying that before. Because if you can just not do those things, then that is one of the best ways to protect yourself, even if you don't have money or time to start a formalized entity, because that's free, right? Googling news stories, written formal complaints, that's all free. And that's actually just as valuable as, not necessarily just as valuable, but could be just as valuable. All right, so next thing that we'll talk about. We are talking about contracts with internal partners. So your business partners, your first employees, necessary contractors. And so if you are a non-technical founder and you're doing a technical business, the person who makes your app or your website, or the person who is the engineer that helps build your product. All right, so again, lots of things that you can Google. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about that. This is like a jumping off point for you to do your own research. What I'm going to talk about, and you can just Google all sorts of different types of contracts. So keywords could be partnership agreement between founders, things like that. What I'm going to talk about is, I want to highlight how you should read these types of things, or how you should when you read articles about all the things that can go wrong with startup founders, here are the 3 areas that things can go drastically wrong. These are generally the most important parts of any of these agreements. Number 1, compensation. Who gets paid what and when and why? Ownership. So this is of the company. So who has equity? What kind of equity is it? When does it vest? Meaning, when does the person actually have that ownership? And then also think about ownership of the product, because just because you make, a company can make several products. And so someone can own, for example, the intellectual property of a specific product without owning the business. More on that later. Finally, control. Who decides what decisions you make and what happens if no one can agree on making those decisions? And so imagine a situation, I mean, this is sort of the common nightmare situation, right? You have a team of 2 business partners and they agree and they're working hard and they have a big decision that they're about to make. Let's say it's a big deal for who to distribute the product. And you have one distributor who will pay you $50,000, but they don't really care about the product very much. And so you're not sure if they'll be able to distribute it well. But you have another distributor that will pay you $10,000, but they're in love with the product and you believe that they're going to do a very good job with it. What if you disagree on who to go with, right? Well, you're like, oh, we'll figure it out when we get there. But think about how it's actually impossible to figure that out. Why? Because if one person says we should go with distributor A and the other person says we should go with distributor B, who is the tiebreaker? Absolutely no one, because there is no one else other than you who are the key decision makers. And as a result, you have to destroy the business, right? You have to unwind the business, or you have to then become competitors with one another as you scramble to figure out who has the rights to the product, right? And so this is how those situations happen, and this is how the probability of things going wrong goes up when you have internal partners, because people can disagree on things, and they do all the time. And so this is why you should anticipate disagreement before it happens, and figure out very early on who controls what and when they do have a veto power and when they don't. And if you do have a dispute, who resolves that dispute before it gets to the point that someone decides to bring in a lawyer. All right, so compensation, ownership, and control. These are things that when you read articles about partnership agreements and owners of LLCs and startup funding, these are the things that you should think about more than anything else. All right, so what do these types of agreements anticipate? All sorts of things. Let's just give you a few examples. If one founder leaves, does the company or the remaining founders have a right to buy back the departing founder's shares? Okay, let me sort of simplify this a bit. All right, you have 3 people and you all are in the wreck and you all think that the business is taking off, and then you all graduate, and so 2 of you think that the business is awesome, but then one of you gets a job that they like more than the business. What happens to that person's compensation, right? Do they still own the business even though they're not working on it anymore? Do they have rights to the money that you make? Do they have any control left over what you can and can't do with the business? Do you compensate them for all the time that they spent for the last several years that you've been working on it, even though now you all are going to be very successful with this and they didn't get anything while they were working on this? That seems unfair. And so to prevent people from getting upset at you, you need to figure this out in advance, because it will happen. And if it doesn't happen, then it didn't take very long for you all to come to a consensus, at least as to what would happen if this was a problem. Right? And I want to make sure that this is clear, because I think a lot of people, when they hear, oh, lawyer is talking, oh, I'm going to see a lawyer, they think that like this is like a guild of wizards or something who just like come up with this magical document, and now we've given you the solutions to your problems. But in actuality, what we're simply doing is we are looking at a set of common problems that happen, right? For example, a founder leaves, and then that no one knows what to do with that person, and then telling you about those problems before they happen, and then having you decide, well, what do you want to do? And then you write that down in an agreement. You don't have to have a magical person to do that. You can just anticipate all of these things ahead of time by reading about what has happened to people in the past who have done this type of thing like you, and then figure out your solution. And of course, it's useful to have someone with a lot of expertise in figuring out what those solutions can be, because many of those solutions are often complex, right? If you're dealing with shares of a co-founder at a corporation in a startup, and that startup could be like $1 billion startup, yeah, you're going to have a lot of complexity. But you can write down on a napkin what you want to do, and then save that napkin as your general partnership plan until you have the money, time, energy, or willingness to talk to a lawyer who can then make it pretty and put it into a contract that you all can sign. You all make contracts on your own until you have the resources to hire a lawyer. So just don't think about like, oh, well, I can't do this because I'm not a lawyer. You can do this because you've had problems in the past that you've anticipated, and you've been able to figure out how you would fix them, and you can write those things down. Right? That is the nature of what's happening when I'm talking about contracts with internal partners. All right. What time commitment to the business is expected of each partner, right? So does everyone guarantee that they're always going to work a certain amount on this project? And if they don't do that, are they blacklisted, or do you kick them out, or do they make less compensation, or do they have less control if they don't do one of these? And so you can start to see that each one of these topics, right, can be boiled down to, oh, well, if this person doesn't actually do the things that we expect from them, then we take away control, or we take away compensation, or we minimize their level of ownership, etc. How will key decisions and day-to-day decisions of the business be made, right? There's no one answer, but you could do it by majority vote, right? Unanimous vote. You could take it away from certain people, right? Oh, I make decisions about the creative aspects of the product, and you make decisions about the business aspects of the product. Oh, well, you have first say over the business aspects of the product, but if we have 3 people who all unanimously agree otherwise, then they can veto you. You can have an endless amount of ways that you can resolve the problem, simply if you acknowledge that these things will be problems ahead of time and just figure out what works for you. And so, again, I want to highlight something. This is one of the reasons why it's very difficult when someone asks, like, oh, what should we do with my agreement with my co-founders? It's because it doesn't matter what you actually do, the details of it, as long as those details are well thought out and they work for you. Right? And so this is why there's no magic spell. There's no sort of thing that I could just tell every single person, you should do this, right? During this conversation, your problem would be solved, because every person's business is different. All right. Under what circumstances can a founder be removed as an employee? So you know that type of person. This is a person you worked with in high school who just like sits around waiting for everybody else to come up with the answer in the group project, and then takes all the credit for it afterwards, right? You don't want that person as part of your business, and so there should be mechanisms by which you can tell that person to leave, because at some point, I mean, think also think about maybe you started your business doing one thing and then you realize that that was not actually profitable or useful. And so you sort of pivot towards doing something else. And so suddenly one person's skill set who is great and integral to your first idea is actually not so useful for your second idea. To what extent can you get rid of that person, or can that person leave, right? Because you don't have to want to kick someone out for them to realize that maybe that what you're doing is no longer part of what they're interested in doing themselves. What assets or cash does each founder contribute or invest into the business? And so we could talk a lot about, for example, promissory notes for loans and all that stuff, but let's push all that aside and let's make this very practical. Things cost money to do, even if you're simply paying for a hosting account for $20 each month with Squarespace. And so to the extent that lots of people can have problems, right? Those problems come from someone spent a lot of money and now they got kicked out of your business and they want that money back. And so figuring out what is important, how money works, who gets repaid and when, if someone put money into the system, is very, very important. This is somewhat resolved, at least sometimes, by having a formal entity like a LLC or a corporation, but even then it's not. And so this is very, very important. Who needs to put money in, how much money needs to be put in, and who gets their money back and when. How will the sale of a business be decided? All right, so you haven't even started your business. Why are you talking about selling the business? Because one of the points of starting a business is to make that business potentially sustainable, right? Or make money. And since most businesses fail, the vast majority of businesses that don't fail don't become gigantic public companies. They get acquired, right, by other smaller companies. And so one of your exit strategies, which is something that you'll probably learn about over the course of the semester, or you can Google it after this conversation, you should always think about what your exit strategy is, and that will often be selling the business. And so if you sell a business, you often all get a windfall, the people who own the business. And so this is, again, one of those situations where people get ugly really quick, because as soon as lots of money is involved and one person believes that they own more of the business or that they're entitled to more compensation from the business than another person, that will be a huge problem. And if we can anticipate this huge problem ahead of time, because most businesses sell themselves to other businesses, right? Most small businesses do. If they're successful, then we should figure out what we can agree upon. And again, I want you to think about it in a very specific way. You are not opening up a crystal ball and deciding, oh, if we sell the business, we will all get $1 million. Because what if someone buys the business for $100,000? What you're doing instead is you're figuring out, here are the basic ground rules for what will happen. The minimum things that you expect, not the maximum things, because no one can tell the future, but we will all get at least 20% of the sale price of the business, meaning that you can negotiate. If there's 3 founders and 20% times 3 equals 60%, everybody can negotiate after the other 40%, but you all confirm that it is absolutely fair now that everyone will get 20, right? There can be, you're thinking about the minimum things. If we sell the company, then after we hear that the company is being sold, none of us can be kicked out anymore, right? Because now we don't want a situation where someone just randomly kicks someone out, knowing that if they do kick them out, then they'll make more money. That seems insane, right? But it's the type of thing that can happen all the time. And so if you can anticipate the problem, you can discuss the problem, even if the problem is theoretical, right? Think about it this way, right? It takes maybe a couple hours to think about how to fix these issues, but it would take months or years of legal wrangling and litigation and bad feelings if you didn't figure this out ahead of time. And by the way, another thing, again, everybody thinks about, I'm talking about contracts in sort of like oh, it's like a PDF that you download from the internet and it's like templates that you sign. But I'm talking about contracts in terms of a relationship between people, right? And as a relationship, these things can change. And so maybe you didn't figure out the answers to literally all of these questions over the course of, I don't know, a 10-hour meeting, but you realize, oh, well, let's answer some of these questions now. And then in 2 weeks, we'll have another meeting about our business and we'll answer more of these questions and set more of these things in stone. And then in another week and a half, we'll do this. And suddenly you have all these answers worked out. And maybe you change some of them along the way, right? Because that's how people's relationships work. And contracts are simply here to be a memorial of people's relationships that then you can use legal powers to enforce, right? Okay. So we only have 13 minutes left, so let's switch gears to contracts with external partners. So these are not people that you work directly with internally, but these are instead people like vendors, like an outside app development company that you might hire, a distributor of your product. And so again, you can Google these things until the cows come home, and I encourage you to do that. But I'm going to be talking about how to make sense of these things by telling kind of a story. And so it's a story of what happens when you, for example, hire a website or app developer. And you can use this story as a metaphor for thinking about the types of contracts that you'll have with anyone you work with a lot. Okay, so everybody, if you hire someone to make an app for you, you would like them to deliver something for you. That's an app, right? And so when you have an agreement, you'd say, oh, I would be very specific about what I want those deliverables to be. But when we're talking about an app, you realize that an app is not like I don't know, an app is not like what is something people buy? I have no idea. App is not like a pair of headphones or something like that, right? An app is
not like a guitar.
Yeah, it's not like a guitar, right? Like a guitar does a certain set of things and that's what it does, but an app can do literally anything. And so you have to think about the level of specificity that you're laying out what it is that the thing that you're asking for actually does, because you want to make sure that people are beholden to actually delivering those specific things. And so this actually requires you, if you're hiring someone to make an app, to know about how apps are made. And so this is one of these crucial things that I think is important for anyone who might be putting their own agreements together. It's to understand that you cannot write an agreement, or you cannot even hope to think that you can enter into an agreement like this if you don't have some idea about how the thing that the person you're hiring actually works, right? If someone is an engineer who is making a technological product for you, let's say it's I don't know, a Raspberry Pi, you know, those like little computers, right? Like you need to know something about how hardware is made so they can't hand you something that doesn't work, because no contract in the world will save you from the idea of asking them to deliver something and they deliver exactly what you asked for, but it's actually the wrong thing because you didn't know what you were asking them for to begin with, right? Timing is important. Every complex project, and this is the only truth that you can rely on, every complex project always takes longer than you think it will to work, right? I teach law students how to write agreements, and so Sometimes we're working with, for example, game developers. And so it doesn't matter, game developer, person who's making technology, person who's building an app. The only thing you can actually count on is that all of the dates that you're thinking about are wrong. How wrong they are really just depends on a handful of other factors. But here's why. Number one, anyone who you're working with who might be making one of these things always wants your bid, right? They always want your work. So they'll always be more optimistic about what it is that you're going to deliver and how fast they can deliver it than they actually will be. Because once you've started paying them to make the thing, it doesn't matter how long it takes for them to make it because they've already gotten your work. All right, number two, the scope of what they're making will change as they make it. And so, for example, with an app or a website, they have to start out by kind of giving you a prototype of what it is that you want. Sometimes they're called wireframes, right? You look at this prototype and you're like, oh yeah, I like A, B, and C. D, E, and F kind of need to be tweaked. And I actually have this great feature, X, Y, and Z that I want integrated. So now suddenly the deliverables that you thought were being delivered have changed. And so this is going to happen constantly, right? You're always changing the types of things that you're asking for, adding new things and maybe subtracting old things. And all these things require new energy to be put into them in order to make them successful. And so this is, again, why people are always late and everything costs more than everyone believes that it's going to cost because, and so you can Google this phenomenon in projects. It's called scope creep. This is like the one of the technical terms for it. And it's the idea that the scope of what is being delivered is so consistently changing that you want to rein those things in. All right, whenever you're working with any complicated situation, you're also thinking about how can I minimize the amount of scope creep. So I think, and again, this goes back to, I need to know how the thing that I'm asking someone to do actually works. Because let's say that you looked at the wireframes and you're like, oh, I love it, but actually, can you change that thing that's red to a thing that's blue? And so if you don't know anything about development, you might think, oh, that might be like a 20-minute change. But actually, the developers secretly didn't let you know that it's actually it takes 8 hours of work to change the thing from red to blue, and you didn't even realize that that was a huge issue. And so knowing more about the thing that you're asking for someone to do is very, very important, and it will make sure that you're highly specific about deliverables, and also it will make sure that even though everyone's timing is going to be off, your timing is lessened.
Hi, Shaun.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but it looks like there's been quite a few questions that have been asked throughout the chat the whole time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we're running out of time. I hope you don't mind me just reading them to you and you can
Yeah. This is why I said we could only get through like 2.5 things before it's ended. So yeah, let's just start some questions.
Okay.
Is it time though, Shaun, for the questions? I mean, are you okay with that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'll start from the top.
It's supposed to be interactive. So.
Yeah, the first question was, if you get money from F&F, can you put it in your own bank account?
And who asked the question?
This is from Ray from TCXR.
What is F&F?
Ray, you want to unmute yourself?
Friends and family.
Oh, okay. I mean, it really just depends on whatever one's agreement is with the funders. So normally, a outside person who doesn't know you is not necessarily interested or willing to invest in someone when they know that that money is going into their internal bank account rather than an entity's bank account that has some sort of legal protections over whether or not it can be used and whether or not the person can get their investment back if it doesn't work out. But I can't answer your question in your specific situation specifically. But if someone's a sole proprietor, they run their business out of their own bank account. And so if they're moving in furtherance of their business, it has to be, the money has to come from somewhere and it has to be from their bank account. And so again, I wouldn't be able to answer, and you probably don't want me to answer off the top of my head, whether or not it's something that you could specifically do in your situation, but it seems to be hard for a sole proprietor to take money anywhere except for their own bank account.
Thank you, Shaun. Okay, the next question is, what are quickly some pros and cons of using a service like Nolo or LegalZoom to form an LLC or corporation?
Pros are it's less expensive, and it's much easier because you don't have to contact anyone. You can just fill in a set of forms. Many potential cons. The higher complexity your business is, the more likely it is that what Nolo or LegalZoom is doing doesn't necessarily apply fully to your business. A sort of middle point between pros and cons is that sometimes you can actually, when you have more money, you can go to a lawyer and then fix the problems that come out of making an LLC or a corporation through LegalZoom, but sometimes you can't. And those problems can be super complex, and I can't really get into any of those right now. But the point is that they have their points, and you can actually Google, because there's lots of people with bigger brains than me who have written articles about the pros and cons of using LegalZoom. It's something that I wouldn't necessarily suggest someone do if they have the money, because the strategy around creating your LLC and the documents that pertain to it are often more important than the actual things that you file, right? And so LegalZoom can't come up with a strategy. It can only come up with the paperwork.
Thank you, Shaun. Then Carlos asks, is it possible to phase out a partner from an LLC partnership if someone wants out, or is it easier just to open a new LLC?
Oh, so as long as your agreements have the manner in which someone can be taken out of the LLC, then you can do whatever you want. So the LLC is kind of like, you have the documents that govern how your specific LLC works. And so as a sole proprietorship, you might put together a partnership agreement, but as an LLC, you'll have a certain set of documents that describe, oh, here's how the LLCs work, and here's how ownership is given or not given of the LLC. And so phasing out is a difficult term, because does that person who's being phased out currently have ownership over the LLC in some way, or not? But yeah, you can almost agree to anything when you're putting together an LLC. And so this is why it's one of the reasons why LegalZoom sometimes isn't helpful, because it doesn't answer any of these questions. It only gives you paperwork. And so the bigger answers are, of course, once I have this formal entity, how should we actually work together? Right? Who should own what and when? A lot of those questions that I talked about before. But yeah, even if you don't have an LLC, figure out how to phase people out who you don't want to work with anymore, or phase people in that you do want to work with. All right.
Looks like, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer all the questions. But I can read maybe one more and see
Yeah,
if we have
go
any time
for
after
it.
that. The next one is from Allison, and it asks, if you are joining a team or business already established, how do you protect yourself while helping them grow? And do you have a separate contract with them, or do you have to start a new contract?
So this is one of those things that I think is important. So everyone has their own interests, and if you are entering into a new business with someone else, then it behooves you to write whatever contract that you're coming up with from your perspective, whether or not that's with a lawyer. And so I think that you should be concerned with getting things like ownership, control, and compensation that are very useful to you. You should be less concerned about protecting them in your agreement. You should come up with something that works for you. And if they don't give you the things that work for you, then consider not working with them. And so that's where I think that you should start. But you should probably not take a contract from someone else if you can help it, because that contract is always going to be written from their perspective. And so unless that agreement happens to dovetail with your interests in these three categories, then you should just present your own counteroffer.
So I don't mean to interrupt here. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know that some people are going on to the next classes right now, and so we do want to thank everybody for coming today. Thank you, Shaun, so much for, as always, these wonderful in-depth workshops, and if anybody wants to stick around, I will be here for a little bit longer to answer questions. I don't know if Shaun, if you can spend a couple more minutes with us.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just
Wonderful.
gonna keep knocking them out.
Awesome. So everybody, thank you for coming. It was wonderful having you. Just so you know, for the entrepreneurship students at the Rec, we are going to be a little bit later tonight for our Monday meetings. They are going to be tonight, I believe at 6:30. We'll be sending a message out on that. And everybody else, if you have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next one.
Yeah, and just remember, if you these are open to anybody who hasn't done one before, so feel free to go to bit.ly/NMR2021, sign up for a session. Again, first come, first serve. There's only 3 currently open. So
I doubt that there's even 3 now, but
yeah, it looks like it filled up earlier.
okay, and also if someone has done one before, please don't sign up again, just because we want new people. If you want to talk to us again, feel free to go to our website and sign up. Talk to us through our contact form. Finally, what's it called? If you weren't able to sign up for one, but you really, really want to, if you can send me just an email to Shaun@newmediarights.org.
make sure to copy me on that too, just so that I know too. Yeah.
And just let me know sort of what your project is, maybe just like a couple sentences about that, and we'll let you know if we do open up some more times, because we have opened up more times in the past when people have wanted it. All right.
So I'm going to stop recording now, and thank everybody who is on their way. Goodbye. And everybody else will stick around and answer questions if you need it.